Harry, it's exactly what we predicted in the video we made earlier before this all went down. These federal judges being pissed off by Donald Trump's assault on the Constitution and what we predicted he was going to do in terms of pardon and commute all of the January 6th insurrectionists. Now, these federal judges, by and large, from both political parties, judges appointed by Obama, Clinton, Biden, judges appointed by Reagan, George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, and Trump, were sending these warnings out to Donald Trump before inauguration, before this week. And what they were saying, the Trump ones in particular, reading between the lines, were like, you've made us do a lot for you. Don't make us look stupid, and don't push the limits too far, especially when it comes to January 6th insurrectionists or obvious questions on the Constitution, because we did your bidding. They didn't say it exactly like that, Harry, but, reading these opinions, there was a little bit of that in there. So what does Donald Trump do? Pardons and commutes all of the January 6th insurrectionists, and then passes dozens and dozens and hundreds of executive orders, and most are just clearly violative of the United States Constitution. I mean, Donald Trump just divining that birthright citizenship should never exist. And then he cites as a example of that, how he almost claims that like Native Americans are not really Americans and United citizens, even though they're born in the United States. Thus, he argues anyone born in the United States should be viewed of as a person who's part of their own hypothetical tribe, a stateless, citizenless person. And, this Reagan-appointed judge in the state of Washington slapped him down right away. And in the birthright citizenship case, Donald Trump's an instant loss on a major constitutional question. This Reagan-appointed judge was like, he's a Reagan-appointed judge, so he's been a judge for quite a long time. He goes, I have never seen a more obvious question and egregious violation of the Constitution that is so utterly clear. We see this tension in all these other areas, Harry. You have federal judges who are basically saying, what do we do with these January 6th insurrectionists? These are dangerous people. Their family members testified against them. So can we still impose like limits and restraints? Like, how about a basic one? Like, the Oath Keepers shouldn't be able to go to the Capitol building unless we, the judge, approve it. So the Judge Mehta does that. And then boom, Trump's DOJ right away goes, nope, they deserve to go to the Capitol. That's where they belong. And it's like, you see what they're doing, Harry. You were a top official at the DOJ, United States Attorney from Western Pennsylvania, the top attorney there. What do you make of this? What do you make of the week? Break it down for us.
Yeah. So much to say. And, I'm sorry to be sounding kind of apocalyptic, but, I think it's the most sustained assault on the Constitution of any given week in the nation's history. Let's start with these judges. They were already sort of out front in saying, don't do these pardons. And as you say, from Trump appointed up to Reagan, everywhere in between, young, old, etc. And they're not used to being defied. And they, were clearly just fit to be tied. The January 6th violent offenders came before them, and you had, all they could do to reach for and kind of set the record at how odious this is. And Judge Chutkan says he's trying to whitewash the blood, the terror, and the feces. That, she doesn't do something like that lightly. They are really disgusted, and just would have thought, a lot of people would have thought till the very last moment that he was going to, J.D. Vance said so on TV. Pam Bondi said so on TV. Surely you would never, ever pardon people who had been violent toward toward law enforcement. And that was the, I think, working assumption even within the administration. Came down to the end, and Donald Trump, it's been reported, and it certainly stands to reason, said, fuck it, pardon them all. And I've written about this week, and you've had some really good YouTubes why it's so. Besides all the individual law enforcement officers and others, this poor guy now cowering and having to move and getting a gun because these guys are out and triumphant and want to be. They're sort of like brown shirts. I'm sorry, that's really they're kind of a paramilitary force who are now ready to serve Trump. All the individual stuff is odious, but just the overall attack on the Constitution. Remember, this is at bottom a way of trying to not just justify, but now glorify the violent attack in order to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. It is, and that's how Chutkan said, you're trying to whitewash this whole thing, and that part is true. Birthright citizenship. I think it's an interesting point, Ben, and I'm just not sure. It is such a crappy argument. It goes directly against the language of the 14th Amendment. So this judge, this Reagan appointee, comes out. The first thing he says, you don't want to hear this if you have to defend, it boggles the mind. And then, from there he goes to flagrantly unconstitutional. But it actually occurs to me, before getting to this point, I want to say one other thing that's totally clear. This has been, cooked up by your Project 2025 brain trust for months, right? They've come out of the box with so much happening, and Trump didn't know any of it, I'm sure, but it does dovetail with his chaos approach to governance. And I think about that in respect to the birthright citizenship. You never want to, bet the house on the Supreme Court going against him. But this really seems like a bridge too far, just crazy. And I think they've maybe think it's too crazy. And yet it serves a really good purpose, even if they lose. It's kind of a decoy move and a sacrificial lamb. And we're talking about it now when there were, at least a dozen really controversial, really stressing the Constitution kinds of provisions. And, if it's served up and they lose it. So, the hallmark of chaos is doing so much at once. You sort of forget about it. You don't keep track, move on to the next one. And so laughable that it might be kind of set up almost as a sort of decoy, but so much happening. And, I am, and you too, I'm very, really determined to fight back. The Republic hasn't been lost yet, but there's a lot of people out there who really, I think, are taking it pretty casually and not realizing the inroads that are being made on the rule of law and constitutionalism, and that you can't, you look at examples from other countries, you can't pull back from once you go down these roads. So I think we're in a really very rough, important, and perilous moment.
The United States Supreme Court's absolute immunity ruling, to me, if the underpinning of our Constitution, if you were to boil down our Constitution to, maybe one sentence, right? It's that no one is above the law. And it's, also like we're a country of we the people, not I the dictator. That's like literally why we were founded. And so, when the Supreme Court to me made that ruling and said, actually, when you're in office, absolute immunity applies. Yes, it involves Donald Trump's criminal conduct and specifically these cases, and these cases. But Harry, to me, the cascading effect is as long as you're doing it in your office, you can be cruel, brutal, go through every hypothetical. You can do whatever you want. And the worst that'll happen is a federal judge will use words to say, you shouldn't have done that. And to me, that right there is the main thing that I think is responsible for a lot of this, the constraints that were there the first time, was that, hey, if you do certain things, like you could be criminally prosecuted for them. And now, like, now you can't. You could do whatever you want. Just say you're doing it as a core constitutional function. I'll give you the final word, but that's kind of my reflection of the ruling.
Yeah, look, something else that was there before is you could embarrass and humiliate yourself and have your pretty conservative appointees in the various agencies walk out on you or threaten, as the DOJ did, to resign en masse. Nothing like that's happening here. Everybody is totally on board with a government that's, not only isn't it devoted or tethered to the basic principle that you articulated accurately, Ben, but it's the principle that does govern everyone is self-aggrandizement of Trump and vicious sort of petty revenge. That's the other thing that is coming out. And, so that's one thing that's very different. Another thing, and I wonder what you think of this, because you have built a really phenomenal and important group of people who are energized and are invigorated and are fighting back. But I do get the sense, you contrast what's happened in this week with where things stood in 2017 and the Million Women March and the kind of really organized democratic opposition. And maybe you could throw in here legacy media and how the New York Times and Washington Post of the world were reacting. And that all seems like the air has been let out of the tires. So not only is he kind of confounding and just leaving everyone chaotic and not know what to point at, but the forces that you expect to step up in the media, in the Congress, in the American people, at least as of now, seem to be taking a wait and see attitude. And, I've spent a fair bit of time now in the last couple of weeks trying to, figure out paths from different countries that were democracies and then devolved into authoritarian regimes. And that is kind of what happens. The overall either indifference or just, fatalism. And so I think we have a combination of a really maximalist and devious and pernicious kind of organized set of attacks on the Constitution through executive order. And at least for now, not a really robust pushback. And, this week, obviously people, I'll put you and me on and pat our own backs, but overall, I think it's worrisome how much he's been able to coast.
Talking Feds Substack, Talking Feds YouTube, Talking Feds podcast. It's where I go to get my news, and there's no one out there like Harry who's an expert in these subject areas. He's practiced at the top level, worked in the top areas, so please check it out. Again, Talking Feds Substack, Talking Feds YouTube, and the Talking Feds podcast. Subscribe to all of them. Thanks, Harry.
Thank you, Ben.
Can't get enough Meidas? Check out the Meidas Plus Substack.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.